Would we put on the music and roll it? Oh.
Well, is this on? Is this working? Yeah. We're here for a live episode of Gender A Wider Lens. We're thrilled to see you all. We're in Lisbon, Portugal. And we are very lucky to be joined by Billboard Chris. Presumably your parents didn't name you Billboard, right?
I joke all the time that they had a lot of foresight when they named me.
Okay.
But I do have another name. My name is Chris Elston. It's harder to say, so you can just call me Billboard. People call me Bill. That's fine too.
Well, my question, I think, is everybody's question, which was, how on earth did you come to be known as a man who walks around with billboards on his body? And how did this come about?
Yeah, normally these are people preaching about the end of the world and they don't get very much respect. But here I am sitting on a stage with you two lovely ladies, so I must have done something right. But I started this campaign. So I started learning about this child abuse, which is what this is. There's no such thing as a transgender child. They're called girls and boys, and we shouldn't be cutting off body parts and sterilizing children. And so someone I followed on Twitter back in the day in 2019 started talking about this stuff. And I came across this term puberty blockers, and I said, well, what the heck are those? So at the time, my daughters would have been 7 and 9. And I started researching it. And I'm one of these guys who researches everything. I used to be an investment advisor. I had a real job, but I've done what all successful financial advisors do, and I became a human sandwich board standing out on the street getting punched in the face by Antifa. But it really impacted me. I couldn't believe we were doing this. Who stops the development of children? What's wrong with you? How can anyone do that? And not only that, they're cutting off the breasts of girls as young as 12 in North America. And all because these children are being taught that they were born in the wrong body. What? That's extraordinarily abusive. Never mind the physical abuse. And it really impacted me. And I started researching it. And it just gets crazier and crazier the more you read. And all throughout 2020, I was reading about this every night. My wife probably thought I'd lost my mind. She'd be marking kids' homework because she's a teacher, and I'd be reading about all this. And then in July of 2020, Kelly J. Keane put up a very controversial sign at the Edinburgh train station that said, I love J.K. Rowling. And it got taken down after one day because some people on Twitter complained that it was hate speech. And so the government-run train authority took it down. And we should be able to talk about anything. But when kids are coming to harm, we need to talk about that especially, more than anything. Yet people were afraid to talk about this. They were afraid to say the word trans, like they'd whisper it. It's one of these taboo things that we're not allowed to talk about. And so I just rejected that outright. And part of this also for me is battling this assault on our freedom of speech that's going on throughout the West. So you can't even put up a sign that says, I love the world's greatest children's author. And I was reading Harry Potter every night with my little one at the time, which to this day is my greatest memory in my whole life. Those bedtime story times with your kids, parents in the room will understand. And so I just decided I was gonna put up a billboard that said the same thing in Vancouver. And I did, and it got taken down after a day because a Vancouver politician said it was hate speech. And so I was a bit ready for that. I'd actually signed a contract for 3 months with an option to extend. And it was during COVID, so I got a COVID special. But then it got taken down after one day. I ended up getting my money back after about a month. But right away, that same night, I leveraged all the outrage online into a quick little fundraising campaign. And a week later, had a billboard up in San Francisco. And then all throughout Utah, Portland, Los Angeles, all throughout the metro in Washington, D.C., and then Times Square. So that was all in September. I was very busy. I ran out of money. And no sign companies in Canada would work with me because it's Canada. And we have a monopoly of really 2 companies that do all the signs. And so I said, well, they can take down my billboard, but they can't take one off my back. Because my whole intention from starting this was to start conversations. Because that I Love J.K. Rowling billboard starts a lot of conversations. People go, what the heck's that all about? Why all the controversy? And they start looking into it. And so I had some signs made. And the first place I went was where that billboard had been, almost like a protest. You can take down my sign, but here I am wearing a sign that says I love J.K. Rowling and a sign that says gender ideology does not belong in schools. Because for me, the biggest thing, apart from social media, which we can't do too much about, we can get this out of schools. But when I learned that this ideology had been put into all of our schools, I knew that we're cooked. You can't stop the indoctrination of your society when this is in the schools. This is the same tactic that every totalitarian dictator has used throughout history, trying to change the minds of the youth, driving those wedge between kids and their families. So I had a sign that said gender ideology does not belong in schools, and I went and stood outside and I took a picture. And the immediate reaction on Twitter was better than any of those billboards really that I put up, except for maybe the very first one, because that was a big shocker. But I got way more support, and it was because I'm a person behind the sign. I'm not just some expensive sign that's anonymous. I'm a person behind it, and I'm not anonymous. And that breathes courage into people because everyone was afraid to do that. And so I had decided long before I'd embarked on that first billboard even that I was going to make this a life mission of mine to stop this ideology. And I knew we had to do that by starting conversations. And so when I started going outside with the signs, I just haven't stopped. And in the beginning, I wasn't even recording all my conversations. I ended up getting a body cam to protect myself because I get assaulted and people lie about me and stuff. But after a few months, I started posting some of the conversations, and it was helping people to learn about this, which has been really effective. And then I started traveling Canada. And then eventually when the borders opened in November 2021 because of COVID, I started going into the US. And I get so much support down there because there's a different spirit in the US than really any other country in the world. There's a lot of fighters in the US. I think it stems back to 1776. To be honest, I honestly think that because they rebelled against King George, and that rebellious spirit has been handed down generation to generation. As Canadians, we used to make fun of Americans for their patriotism and their pride, but I think it's beautiful. And there are so many organizations fighting things down there too, that when you take on a battle like this, you meet a lot of great people. And I've met so many amazing people. And whereas nobody was talking about this 4 years ago, now 25 states have passed legislation to stop this.
It's funny. I also tried to put up a billboard in Dublin, and I was foiled. I didn't think of a sandwich board. Never occurred to me. I just went, oh, right. But you've obviously got an extraordinary passion within you, but you managed to have very, and I think you were going to ask this, you managed to have incredibly calm conversations. You kind of model conversations really about how to kind of educate people about it. Did you teach yourself this, or were you always in that way inclined?
Well, I think being in sales as an investment advisor, you're really just a glorified salesman. That's all you are. You learn things about human psychology. As a 25-year-old trying to get a 70-year-old's life savings to manage, that's a bit of a difficult task. So you have to learn some things, but you also have to learn how to communicate with people well. So I think that probably helped. But ultimately, this isn't that complicated. It's a conversation. One person talks, the other person talks. Ideally, that's how it should work. And you go back and forth. And for this is about education. This is all about educating people. So you can only educate little bits at a time. You can't dump too much on someone, and you can't force information into people either. So I think I have learned things just in the process of doing this, because there are certainly tactics that can be used to help people with this. But the ordinary person out there, when they first saw me, they had no idea what puberty blockers were. They all thought I was insane. But when you dress well as well, it plays a psychological trick. Because if you're sitting out there in jogging pants and a sandwich board, you're not going to get any respect. But when you wear a blazer and you look professional, and you also have a message that people instinctively agree with and respect, because no one really wants to talk about it in society, as ridiculous as I look, I was always surprised that I actually got any respect at all. But this isn't complicated. They're stopping the development of children who believe they've been born in the wrong body and are trying to get a sex change. And 90% of people out there think that's insane.
You raised such an interesting point, and I think a lot about the last question that was asked in the conference. Someone said, the average person would never believe the kinds of things that we all know in here. And I think a lot about why that is, and how the medical industry, psychiatric industry, not only have been captured, but have been able to get away with this. And part of it is the individuals championing a lot of these early interventions have really nice looking pedigrees on paper. They have the image that you're talking about, right? Like when you wear a suit and you have a pocket square and you look like a professional put together person. And these types of ideologues are in really prestigious places, especially in US universities. And I think that's a really important point of how image and perception plays on people's minds. And I guess a second point that I'm thinking about is, I think because what is happening to children is actually so unbelievably egregious, the average person thinks there must be a really good reason for it. Like, there's no way that these Harvard and UCLA and all these big name people would be advocating for this for kids unless there was something I don't understand and I don't know. So it's almost like on the back of ignorance and fear and flabbergasted people, this is perpetuated. And I'm wondering, when you encounter people on the street who initially think you're crazy and they don't understand even what a puberty blocker is, what do you find is like the key to helping them start to understand? Or like, how do you get people over that, well, this must be, I mean, there must be a good reason for this, to like, oh God, something terrible is happening?
So most people, at least I would say 9 out of 10 for sure, they ask, what are these drugs? And they've heard something about trans kids. I don't use that term. But you just say, these girls, you think they're boys, and they want to change their sex or change their gender. Well, they're given this drug. Who's giving them this drug? The Children's Hospital. What is this drug? It's called Lupron. And you can get into the scientific part of it if you need to. Like, you need to know what you're talking about with these people. Most people never need to hear that. But if I need to tell them that they're gonadotropin releasing hormone analogs that stop the pituitary gland from releasing luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, which in turn stop the testes from producing testosterone, well, I can say that, and they go, okay, because you didn't just make that up. And today we have so much evidence that I can pull it up on my phone in 2 seconds flat. I can bring up a video from Boston Children's Hospital where the doctors are talking about cutting off the breasts of 15-year-old girls or 14-year-old girls. I can show them where the doctors at the Boston Children's Hospital are talking about doing vaginoplasties and phalloplasties. I can pull up the WPATH files by the lovely Mia Hughes over here. And I can show them the internal emails where they admit that children with schizophrenia or dissociative identity disorder, where one of their so-called personalities had gender dysphoria and the other didn't, and they're transitioning them anyway. Or Jamie Reed's affidavit, where a boy was sexually abusing dogs and he was sent from the psychiatric unit of the hospital to the gender clinic where they gave him Lupron. I mean, this is all crazy stuff. So we have all the evidence in the world, but with the average person on the street, you don't really need to go there. You just tell them the basics. They're stopping puberty in kids. They're giving them the opposite sex's hormones. Because the whole theory of this is it's going to be too traumatic if a child looks like their sex. If a girl were to grow breasts and get the wider hips, and a man were to get a deep voice and broad shoulders, well, it's going to be more difficult for them to pass later in life. So that's the theory. That's if you were to steel man the argument. That argument doesn't work for girls, by the way, because these 18 and 19-year-old girls who go on testosterone, everyone thinks they're men because they get a beard. And your mind doesn't compute. You see a beard, you think male. But just stick to the basics, and the average person's going to get it, and they're going to be horrified. For the people who are aggressive or on the fence, with them, there's a very simple tactic. Say things they agree with. Because they're not there to have a conversation. They are there to win a conversation. I'm not interested in that. Debate style stuff, that's all about winning, getting gotchas. I'm there to have an honest conversation. They don't want to have it. So I'll say, look, first of all, I think there's no right or wrong way to be a girl or a boy. If a girl's more masculine, if a boy's more effeminate, beautiful. What's wrong with that? And then pause. You have to have these quiet moments. What are they going to say now? They're mad because they thought you were a terrible, evil bigot. And now you just said something they can't help but agree with. And it causes this moment of cognitive dissonance where there's two competing ideas going on in their brain simultaneously. He's an evil bigot. He just said something I can't help but agree with. And it throws them off a little bit. And so they might drop their guard. And then the other thing is ask them questions. Because if you look at this like a cult, and I do look at this like a cult, it has all the hallmarks of one. They self-police their own thoughts. They don't allow themselves to look at the evidence. They cut off their friends and family. They love bomb people to get them into this. And they don't allow themselves to examine their doubts. But by asking questions, what does it mean for a girl to be a boy? Don't try to debate them. Just ask them these questions and wait for the answer. Well, I don't know. I've never been trans. You have to be trans. That's a popular one. Or I said to this woman on the boardwalk in New Jersey last year, what does it mean for a boy to be a girl? She said, well, you know, girls like pink and long hair and nail polish. Okay, so if a boy likes nail polish, is he a girl? They know that's ridiculous. She ended up just saying, oh, I don't know. But that's a powerful moment because they're going to go home and they're going to have to think about these things. Because ultimately, this is all about stereotypes. And they all will claim that they're against stereotypes, but they have this blind spot. They're not all evil, but they have a blind spot where they don't see that they're pushing stereotypes to such a degree that they now think we need to change children's bodies to match these regressive sexist stereotypes.
It's amazing because when I hear you talk, I'm thinking, these are the skills a therapist should have, which is the silence, you know what I mean? The pause, allowing the person to kind of find their thoughts and come back. And also the questions, a good thought-provoking question that opens things up, not a yes or no, a Socratic question is what they're called. And I always call it the splutters. When somebody starts to engage me, I just fall into the splutters and say random things like puberty blockers and I splutter out other things. And I think a lot of us get the splutters, because there's so many thoughts racing through you. Women in prisons. Castor Semenya. And I kind of bullet out vague kind of thoughts that have massive, but you don't. And I'm like, we could all really learn from that. There's a kind of 1, 2, 3 kind of process there. You say a point, which is things like, kind of thought provoking about, you can be any type of girl, you can be any type of boy. And you pause, you hold back. I'm just saying it for us all to learn, really. You pause, you hold back, and let them then speak. And then you come in with the question, well, what do you think? And again, you let them speak. It's kind of a magic solution for a lot of us who find it so difficult, I think.
And I'd like to just defend Stella because you're being so modest, but she's called this pebbles in a barrel for a long time. So it's not like you don't know this. But I think this is a really important point. And, even when I had my talk earlier, I discussed how changing someone's mind, or let's say asking thought-provoking questions, the goal is not to get an immediate 100% turnaround. It's to get the wheels turning. And like you said, Chris, people have to go home and think about that question. Think about how they really weren't sure how to answer and feel stumped.
It's not just about educating them. They have to uneducate themselves. They have all this false information that's blocking them from understanding this. So, yeah, we just have to treat them like human beings instead of trying to win all the time. There was this young woman at the University of Oregon. I went there with Peter Boghossian and James Klug, a friend of mine. He's a big YouTuber in America. And we've been at Portland State University the day before. Oh my gosh. Be very careful there. This homeless man was walking around me with a hatchet in his pocket, and security didn't even tell me. I would have liked to known so I could keep him in my vision. But at the University of Oregon, we had a great time. And there was this one girl who now says she's non-binary or male. I can't remember. And she's scared to talk to us. People get this adrenaline rush all the time where they're literally shaking because they're having this adrenaline dump. And sometimes their face will be ticking. This has happened a lot. And she was like that. And I could see she was just very nervous and scared and didn't trust us. And I just said, I'm just here to have an honest conversation with you. I don't have some agenda. And I just paused. And it was 8, 9, 10, 11 seconds that went by of just silence as she's processing this and almost starting to cry. And it's extremely powerful. It's like when Elon was talking to Jordan Peterson recently. I wish he would have had more opportunity to just have that pause.
Jordan should have shut up for a moment.
Love you, JP, but
Oh yes, so do I.
but yeah, he was saying symbolically, my son is dead. And he's thinking. You got to let him think. And so allowing those big pregnant pauses can be uncomfortable for people, but it's not about what you have to say. It's about what's going on in their minds. So you need to draw out what they already believe so that you can then address it.
Yeah, this reminds me of something that comes up a lot when I'm working with parents whose kids recently announced that they're trans. And oftentimes these are families who parents describe that like they've been super connected. We were best friends. We heard that earlier, like we've always been really close. And I was shocked to hear that my daughter was so scared to come tell us that she's having questions about her identity. She thought that we were going to kick her out or this or that. And oftentimes people who fall into this gender identity belief system are led to believe that people are so dangerous if they don't immediately affirm. And you obviously have faced that with the young woman who got tearful just because you were being gentle and thoughtful and, pausing. So I often say people have to also disconfirm all the lies that have been told about anyone who has different beliefs about gender. We actually have to go out of our way to make sure young people who have these beliefs are reassured, like, this is a safe place for you. Don't worry, I'm not going to attack you. And I think that's a really important lesson that you're raising for anyone here who I imagine lots of people are going to leave this conference and say, okay, I want to put some of this that I've learned into action. And this might be a really good starting place just to try and like embody a warm, calm presence that is not going to get into a debate right away or attack right away. I mean, can you just talk a little bit more about that importance in your work that you do when you're out in the streets having these conversations?
So when a lot of people think of my work, they think of all the crazy moments that have happened because those are the videos that get 50 million views. But almost all the time, I'm just having nice, normal conversations with people. A lot of those times, I cannot post those because they don't want me to. And I'm going to respect all those nice people because they don't want to get in trouble with their boss or they're afraid or whatever. But we just need to have these conversations with the regular people in our lives. It's not all about changing minds. We can't really change another person's mind. That's up to them to allow themselves to start examining this. You can help get that process started. And I have changed minds on the street for sure, but it takes a while. But honestly, we just need to have more of these conversations with the regular people in our lives, because we don't need to change the minds of the far left 10%. We need to reach 5% of the population needs to understand what's going on. That's it. And then you get this cascading effect going on where from those 5%, you get fighters and you get lawyers and you get doctors speaking up and you get people pushing back. There's a law firm that started in Texas called Campbell Miller Payne. And I know that fund that was mentioned earlier today, what's it called?
Themis
Themis
Resource.
I know they've helped them out, and I've talked to these guys. These are 4 dads with 18 kids between them who all left their previous law firms and formed one just to sue for these kids. And they recently just filed a lawsuit against the American Academy of Pediatrics, by the way. And they also, I don't know if this is public yet, but they have one coming up against Johanna Olsen Kennedy.
Oh, wow.
So I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
This is live.
Yeah, I know. That's fine. She'll get it one way or the other. One way or the other. She's the gender clinician, the head doctor at the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, the biggest one in the States. And just as an aside, she received a $5.7 million grant from the NIH, the National Institute of Health, which went to 4 different gender clinics, LA, San Francisco, Boston, and Chicago. Those are kind of the big 4. And part of that grant application, they were given approval to give cross-sex hormones to 8-year-olds, provided they were already entering 10 or stage 2 of puberty. So who's going into puberty that young? It's all girls. It's pretty much exclusively going to be girls. So testosterone being given to 8-year-olds.
And very upset girls, because early puberty is very upsetting for girls.
Yeah, they're 8. That's really... They're all believing in magical thinking. And my gosh, I mean, these people are ghouls. This is ghoulish.
On that point, you've made a huge difference. I think your numbers, I'd love to hear what they are, but I know that some of your numbers are extraordinary, of the views and followers and things like that. Have you had much pushback from kind of larger forces trying to silence you, rather than just scraps on the street, which are entertaining but not as frightening maybe?
Yeah, I should just point out, when you say scraps on the street, I happily just take it. That's my philosophy. I'm not going to push back. I'm not going to do anything back. The one time I pushed back, I got arrested. I got sucker punched from behind, and I was dazed for 7 or 8 seconds. I didn't even know who'd done it. And I came to, it was funny, I had a flashback in that moment to when I was in grade 8, and I got sucker punched in the hallway by Peter Pawaga.
It's your fault, Peter. We're coming to you.
Peter.
Well, we have a special guest. No, I'm just kidding. We don't know Peter.
But I snapped out of it. I didn't even know who would hit me. And it was this guy. I found out later he'd been on social media saying I was advocating for the murder of transgender people and all this stuff. And these young guys pointed him out, and I went to take his picture, and he ran. Now, in Canada, we do have the right to do what's called a citizen's arrest. And I've researched all this stuff over time.
Undoubtedly.
And I just wasn't in the mood to have another guy just come and punch me and get away with it. So I chased after him with my signs on, with my sign behind me, flying behind me like a cape. And I caught him pretty quick because he's not in the greatest shape. And I gave him a single push into the wall. I bounced him off this wall. And he fell down and went boom and stayed down and complained I'd broken his knee. I hadn't. He was later fundraising to get his teeth fixed online, by the way. His teeth were totally fine. He just used it as an opportunity to raise money to fix his teeth. But they arrested me, they booked me, did all the fingerprinting and stuff. That's fun. And I got into my cell, and I was eating a granola bar. I hadn't even laid down yet, and they opened the doors back up, and they released me. I thought, okay, this is great.
It's kind of sweet you were eating a granola bar
Yeah.
in prison. Carry on.
Yeah, I'd been in that same cell a couple months previous when I got attacked by Antifa, and they arrested me instead of them. But that time I didn't even say a word. That was hilarious. I got hit by a union rep.
Silence is violence.
Yeah, silence is violence. Easier to take care of me than it is all those people. But they let me out, and they'd reviewed the CCTV footage, and the guy had admitted to it, to sucker punching me, so they let me go. Fast forward 3 months, and I get a phone call from the Vancouver Police Department saying they want me to come in and give a statement because they're looking at charging me with assault causing bodily harm. And I don't want to get a criminal record. I wouldn't even be able to travel to the States or anything. So I didn't go in to give a statement because they're just trying to build a case against me, because the chief of police is married to that Vancouver city councillor who ordered my sign taken down, by the way. It's all connected politically. But I vowed then and there I'm never touching anyone again. I'm never reacting unless my life's physically in danger. And then sure enough, 1 week later, I'm in Montreal the day after Mia Hughes cast a curse on me in Ottawa. We'd been out on the streets in Ottawa, and for the first time, she decided to go public, and I posted her picture. And the next day, I got jumped in Montreal by a bunch of Antifa people, got my arm broken, didn't say a word to them, didn't react. But anyway, yeah, I got into the story because you were talking about scrapping.
Sorry, I
I'm not
undermined
going
the
to scrap
scraps
in
on
the
the
street. I'm just going to take it. And I think it's extremely powerful when you're calm and these people are crazy, because you don't have to say a word. You're already winning the argument. And they're honestly doing me a favor every time they do that sort of stuff, because the rest of the world sees this. This one video from Vancouver last year got 40 million views just from my own account. And I see people all over the world that saw that video. And it woke a lot of people up. So I want to thank them very much. But yeah, what was the other question apart from scrapping in the
larger
street?
forces.
Oh, larger forces,
If I
yeah.
was kind of in the kind of larger trans lobby, part of me would be saying we've got to silence that man.
Well, they can't. They can't.
Really?
What are they going to do? It's going to take a well-placed bullet to silence me, and that's about it. Because they can't stop me going outside. They can't stop me talking to people. I know my rights. I have freedom of speech.
They usually, from what I could say, usually use smear tactics and reputational damage.
That's all been done.
Yeah.
Just a few months ago, every single house in my neighborhood, I don't even know how far out it went. It was people on streets across the freeway from me even. They all got mail, paid mail, with my picture on it, my phone number, my address, all these smears, a link to a smear site. But I don't care. I know who I am. My family knows who I am. And all that happened was a couple people called me up. They actually wrote my phone number down wrong. This is how intelligent these people are. But a couple people came over to my house and they didn't like it. People don't like it in your neighborhood when others are trying to smear someone. And they're all getting this mail. And what happened? They all learned that I'm fighting to protect kids from gender ideology.
Can't keep a good man down.
To the Antifa losers who sent that all to my community, do it again. I don't care. And you know what? When people try to cancel you and they learn they can't, they stop trying.
Yeah. You know, I think a lot about the fact that, we are in some ways in public platforms. We have our podcasts, we have our books, we have our YouTube channels. And I think the work we do publicly is really important. And then there's a point at which you turn the camera off and then you go live your normal life. And I think a lot of people don't think about that. Like we have lives outside of this work. But obviously, in some ways, the work that you've done around gender is so deeply intertwined with your day-to-day life in ways that I have to say, for me, it's not. Like, I'm so grateful and lucky that my real life day-to-day has never really been impacted by this, except for marginal little people that don't matter. But like, your life has actually been impacted beyond just mean people on Twitter. How has this been for yourself, for your family, if you're able to say anything about that, your kids, your wife? I mean, what do they think about this? Are they just like, Dad, at some point you have to stop? Or what is their take on all this?
No, they 100% support me, of course. And over time, I've had age-appropriate conversations with my kids about this. And both of my daughters now, they're 12 and 14, almost 15. They know more about this than 99.9% of adults, for sure. My eldest is in grade 10 right now, but when she was in grade 7, the teacher brought out the gender unicorn one day, which is this cute
to
little image.
Billboard Chris's kid.
Yeah. And my daughter spoke up and said, well, it seems to me this is a lot about stereotypes. Girls can have short hair. That doesn't make them boys. And because she spoke up, it gave license to all these other kids to speak up. And they all said, yeah, that's right. And so she's a positive role model for the other kids in school. And I know just last week, I spoke at the UN. And I know she was showing my speech to all her friends at school. So.
I feel really that's so hopeful, and I'm so amazed by that, because in some ways it's important to do analysis of the context and all of the like mind control that is happening, but that's amazing actually that teenagers, once they were given permission to think about it a little bit, they all kind of rejected the idea. And this kind of reminds me of what Mateus said yesterday, that it only takes something like 20 to 30% of the population to hold really rigid dogmatic views. I mean, he was more articulate about it than I. But it's interesting because I bet there were only a few kids who were real believers in gender ideology in that group. And because your daughter spoke out, the other kids felt like they could reject it. I mean, I think this just flies in the face a little bit of some of the rhetoric we hear, that this is impossible to overcome. We'll never defeat this. But even the teenagers see through it in a lot of the ways.
Yeah, so maybe none of the kids in the class believed it, because not all teachers are pushing this. This is what a lot of people get confused about. You'll get a couple teachers, maybe even one teacher in a school who's an activist. You'll have the Gay Straight Alliance Club or the Gender and Sexuality Alliance. And what happens during Sex Education Week or Puberty Week at my daughter's elementary school is it's not even the teacher teaching it. They bring in a third-party company. In British Columbia, it's a company called Salima Noon. But all over the world, there's these other companies which are pushing comprehensive sexuality education, CSE. This comes straight from the UN. It's being pushed down through governments. This is all inorganic. It's not happening of its own accord. It's happening because it's been designed to happen. But these third-party companies are full of the most radical people you'll ever find. A lot of trans-identified people work for them. So at my daughter's school last year, I pulled her out for a couple days. But they had these trans-identified people coming to do school assemblies with all the kids from grade 4 to 7. And what message was this company pushing? That if kids don't like their bodies, they can change them. It's outrageous. But I've caused some waves, and you mentioned Billboard. Chris's teacher even brought out the gender unicorn. Well, when I started my campaign, the very first month, I went into my community's Facebook group. You know, every community has a Facebook group for their own area, where if you lose your cat, you can post it or whatever. I didn't post my cat. I posted lesson plans from the curriculum where a kindergartner could get a little card saying, "Hi, my name's Sheila. Please call me they." And her job is to go around the class introducing herself by new pronouns. And I posted these in this Facebook group, and right away, it was a Sunday morning at 8:30 when it should have been quiet. 3 activists came out of nowhere, including a human rights lawyer, who I don't even think lives in the community. I think she's just in all these Facebook groups. And I was debating with these 3 people, and I knew probably 1,000 people were watching this. And they shut down the whole group. Nobody could post anything for days. And so Monday morning, I went to the school, and I went to go talk to the principal, and he'd already heard about it. And so I talked to the principal for 45 minutes in the parking lot, and he's a problem. That guy was a problem. He's gone now. But not because of me.
Was a horse's head involved?
But he was a problem. He's a bit woke. And I said to him, I'm going to take these lesson plans from the BC government's website. I'm just going to print them off, and I'm going to drop them off door to door in my community so parents can learn what their kids are learning in school. He said, if I did that, I would be frightening the community. I said, do you hear yourself right now? If I take the lesson plans around to schools, I'm going to be frightening the community. No commentary from me, just straight from the... So I said to him, even before this conversation, I said, I'm on this campaign, and I told him all about this child abuse going on too, what gender ideology, what it leads to, what the ideology leads to. And I'm more knowledgeable now, but I knew what I was talking about back then. And so he wasn't going to do anything about it. So I went home and I looked up every school board member in all of the cities around Vancouver, probably representing 4 million people. Because in North America, we have school boards for each city. And I looked up all the school trustees, and then I looked up all of their Twitter accounts. They don't all have them, but I looked up all the ones that did. And then I wrote a thread all night long. And in each part of this thread, detailing all the different abuses and people's stories, I tagged all these different school trustees. So when everyone woke up in the morning, they all had about 500 notifications. And the school board ended up reaching out to me for a meeting. And so I met with the head of Safe Schools for Surrey, British Columbia, which is one of the biggest school districts in Canada. and this other top guy. And I kid you not, 3 times during that meeting, the head of Safe Schools BC teared up because she knows I'm right. And I could tell he agreed with me too. But they can't do anything about it because this all comes top down. They said you have to meet with the Minister of Education. Well, he won't meet with me. I tried. I went to Victoria the next day. He wouldn't meet with me. But I caused a big fuss and I caused a big ruckus. So they learned probably I'm not the best person to mess with. So I've basically gotten to choose. I have gotten to choose my kids' elementary school teachers ever since.
Whoa. It's an extraordinary story, and you clearly have an extraordinary sense of purpose. I can't help but think, and I suppose it's where my brain goes. I tend to think because we're up against such a large wall of misinformation, I immediately think, is this scalable? Wouldn't it be helpful if you were teaching more people to kind of handle conversations and to kind of speak to the public or to their schools or to their neighbors? It feels like this should be something we should be scaling out.
Well, I think that's what we're doing right now, and
Right.
I think that's what I'm doing all the time when I post these conversations. I think I reach views on X now for the next year. It'll be close to 1 billion. That's about what I'm averaging. So that's quite a lot, and I've activated some people.
But you could be actively teaching people.
Well, I don't have time.
Yeah.
I'm out on the street and I'm traveling around, and I think that's how I teach people.
Yeah.
You know, Moms for Liberty wasn't talking about this. This is a great parental rights group in America with 130,000 moms and dads and uncles and stuff. But they weren't talking about this issue at all. And I ran into Tiffany Justice one night on a Twitter space where you talk on Twitter. And I introduced her to what I was doing, and she's amazing. She's one of these absolutely absurdly talented and incredible humans who I've met in this journey. And her and her co-founder started this organization January 1st, 2021, and now they have 130,000 members. So that's 130,000 moms fighting this now. And all the presidential candidates come to their summit because they all want their endorsement and everything, and they're a powerful group. And through them, they're reaching millions. So I think people are getting educated, but maybe it would be nice to have a stadium full of people as maybe an opening act for Jordan Peterson. But yeah, I think we're educating people and just exposing what's going on in these gender clinics, like with the WPATH files. What Mia has done is incredible. And I exposed these Boston Children's Hospital videos in August of 2022. And I think that was one of the turning points in the United States for this, because people knew that these gender clinics were doing weird things, but they didn't really get it. And they knew this whole thing was kind of a mess, but they assumed that these are doctors and they're doing doctor things. And then they see this video of the woman who runs the gender multi-specialty clinic at the #1 ranked pediatric hospital in the country, where she says, what is a transgender child? Well, a transgender child is, for example, a girl who tries to pee standing up, or a boy who pees sitting down, or playing with the opposite gender toys, or trying on a sibling's clothing. These are all signs that your child is transgender and can be treated. That's like verbatim. So, how many women here tried to pee standing up when you were little? Congratulations, you're transgender. How many women here loved going through puberty? Oh, you all have gender dysphoria. You're all transgender too. So this is totally nuts, and people saw that it's totally nuts. What boy with 3 big sisters isn't going to be playing dress up with his 3 big sisters? Doesn't make him trans. So this whole thing's nuts. And then these videos, I mean, they talk about the surgeries. You have Dr. Oren Gaynor, who has been in the WPATH files. This man is totally nuts. And he talks about how when they create a fake vagina for a boy, they're reconstructing things to be the way they were supposed to be. I mean, these people are straight up cult members, And people didn't understand how extreme this was and abusive and insane. And so those videos helped wake a lot of people up, but it really got the conservatives going in the States to look into all these other gender clinics. And it started this wave where they looked into all these other hospitals. And now it's the number one talked about cultural issue on the airwaves every day, where 4 years ago, literally nobody was talking about it. Tucker Carlson started talking about it. Now they're all talking about it. And now we even have the New York Post and the New York Times and the Washington Post and Reuters. They're even telling the truth about a lot of this now. So it's a massive shift, and it's never going to stop because too many people have learned the truth, and you can never shut them up. They're just going to keep learning more and more and more.
How did you manage to come to speak to the UN?
So I have this philosophy that good things happen when you go outside. And so I was coming to Portugal because I got this invite from this amazing woman to come to Portugal and speak at GenSpect. And I thought, well, I'm coming all that way. I might as well go over to Switzerland because there is a logic here, I promise, because I wanted to expose this case in Switzerland where this girl was taken from her family. I'd had this video go viral. So the Alliance Defending Freedom International, ADF International, is a legal organization who help people all around the world. And gender ideology is one of their main focuses right now, and the attack on parental rights and this child abuse going on. So there's a couple parents in Geneva who had their child taken by the state because they wouldn't transition her. And so I decided to go and help raise awareness about that. And I also thought it'd be fun because the UN is there and the World Health Organization is there. And these are two of the principal villains in this story of gender ideology. And I figured good things will just happen. But as soon as I announced I was going there, ADF said they can probably get me to speak because they're one of the registered NGOs. And so they got me to speak, and I only had 90 seconds. And it's tough to distill this whole thing down to 90. But I think I did an okay job. And as soon as I finished, someone in that beautiful big round room who was standing behind UN Women. Now, these are the people that don't know how to spell women. They spell it with an X. Womexen, to include all women, including the men. But that woman said to me as I walked by, "Thank you." And I don't know if she was with UN Women or not. She might have just been standing behind them. And then another man came out. I'm not going to say what countries these people are from because they have to do their diplomatic work and they need to stay anonymous. But another guy from another country came out. He didn't know this was going on. And I met with reps from Kuwait. The Saudis and all those guys, they wanted to meet, but they were busy. And Kuwait has a seat on the UN Human Rights Council because that's where I spoke. And I met with the representative for the Vatican as well at his residence. He asked me to take down a tweet that I had written where I would be meeting with him, which I think is just terribly weak. He's the representative of the Pope at the United Nations, and he can't admit to meeting a guy who's trying to stop this child abuse.
And what happened then?
Well, I took it down. But here I am
had you
talking
met
about
with
it live on this podcast, so.
Nobody tweet about this, okay, guys?
So in 6 months' time, I'm going to be going back there. Their March session for the Human Rights Council starts in March. And we're going to plan some events. And I said to the Kuwait guy, because he said, "What should I do?" And I said, "Be bold, just tell the truth." Because you've got all these Western countries always telling you that you're violating human rights in some sort, like in the whole Middle Eastern part of the world. But here you have this opportunity to push back with the truth and say, "Look what you're doing to all these kids." Every single member on that UN Human Rights Council would say female genital mutilation is bad. This is FGM on steroids. And they're not just silent, they're the principal pushers of it. So they're not all evil people in that building. There are a lot of 30-year-old diplomats who got out of college 5 years ago, who, just like every other part of society, are scared to stand up to the LGBTQ lobby, which is really just the TQ lobby. We need to separate those letters. But those letters together those letters play a trick on the human mind, because there was a big gay rights push for a long time, and it was really won around 2010, 2015, all around the West. But what happens? Do all these NGOs close up shop? No. They have to keep the money flowing. They got to keep the doors open. They got to keep everyone employed. So the new focus went from gay rights to trans rights, and they conflated the two as the same thing, and they turned what is a mental illness into a civil rights movement. And combining those letters together just shuts people up, because as soon as you say anything, oh, now you're the homophobe, you're the bigot, you're the transphobe, whatever. But it's not true, and people are starting to find their bravery and their courage and their ability to talk about this. But it just takes time, because we've got to reach the whole population of planet Earth pretty much, because we're dealing with 40 years of propaganda that's been working against us.
Well, on that subject, as we all know, we're in Lisbon, and so is WPATH in Lisbon, and I know you went down to check them out. How did that go?
Yeah. So it's funny, because the elevators are right there where I'm standing, and it's all glass, so they can all see me as they're going up and down. They're all shaking their head at me. So I started a lot of conversations there today. I had a few doctors come out and say, children can't consent, but their parents consent for them. The children assent. Oh, okay, you're just playing funny word games here. I said, well, first of all, I'm all about parental rights, but there's one right parents don't have, and that's the right to abuse their children. And this is child abuse. And if you read the WPATH files by Mia Hughes, you will learn that the parents themselves have no idea what they're signing up for. One of the frustrations of these doctors is that they sit down and they talk to these parents and they explain it all. And then, oh my gosh, in the next meeting, they have no idea what's going on. So if the parents don't understand it, how can the kids possibly understand it?
And, Elon Musk, one of the most powerful men, richest men in the world, and he gave uninformed consent to puberty blockers, which just shows just how pervasive it is and how difficult it is for the parents to penetrate the information they're given.
Yeah, so they played the same trick on him they do with all these parents. They told him he could have a dead son or a live daughter. So how do you justify cutting off the body parts of children? How do you justify sterilizing kids? How do you justify turning them into lifelong pharmaceutical patients? You say they're going to die if you don't do it. It's the only way you can justify this.
Yeah, and I mean, I just want to touch on something you mentioned a moment ago. Like, you said something like saying that a mental illness is a something. Do you remember that phrase?
They've turned a mental illness into a civil rights movement.
Yeah. I just want to touch on that, because in the interest of trying to get people who maybe are fence sitters, maybe people who are caught up in this belief system themselves, of course, I don't police language. Please call it whatever you believe it is. I think what's really tricky about this is when you have an entire medical industry saying to people, including the children and the parents, this is your authentic self, and if you don't do this, you might die. I feel like it's a little bit stigmatizing, for lack of a better word, to say that all these people have a mental illness. I think, if anything, these people have been sold a lie, and that all people are so vulnerable to adopting beliefs, especially when they're in a moment of crisis. They're in the moment of a complicated backdrop of maybe they did have a suicide attempt, or maybe they did have some sort of a mental health crisis. So I wonder what you think about that slightly different take on that framing. I think what you said is really, it's a valuable phrase that really points out something powerful. But I think that the victims here, including the people with dysphoria and their parents, were really sold a lie, more so than just an organic mental illness that came out of nowhere that we're now treating like a civil rights issue. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand. And you always have to know your audience and who you're talking to and frame your words accordingly. But this is a mental health issue. And as Laura Becker's slide earlier showed today, on that list of comorbidities, she had about 12 or 13 of them. And according to the Tavistock's own data, 70% of the children had 5 or more coexisting mental health comorbidities. So gender dysphoria itself is pretty much a lame diagnosis. It's an umbrella term. It's really a false term in most of these cases for something else that's going on with these kids. But gender is being treated as the source of all of their problems. So, to believe that you were born wrong and that really the opposite sex on the inside, that's certainly a mental health issue. Now, I'm sensitive, of course, to do you use terminology that's so stigmatizing that people just close down? I guess it depends on who you're talking to. But we are talking about mental health issues here. And I know they're trying to get away from that. They're trying to treat this as though it's not a mental health issue, that we all just have an innate gender identity, which may or may not coincide with our sex. Yet they still want to call it gender dysphoria so they can bill the insurance companies.
Right.
But honestly, we're dealing with mental health issues, and I think we should just call a spade a spade.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is an interesting train of thought. Let's say that a person shows up, and we're going to be looping in the Dutch beliefs here. A person shows up with no other mental health diagnoses, and they believe that they were born in the wrong body or something like that. Does that make it less compelling, your argument that this is child abuse? I mean, I think that we don't even need to point to multiple mental health diagnoses to say being at odds with your physical reality is a problem. There's a problem there.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yes. So, I mean, first of all, you're going to have a difficult time finding a child who has no other issues at all, but just believes they were born in the wrong body. That's almost non-existent. But even that itself, clearly the child is dealing with something. If they show up at a gender clinic or they show up at a therapist's office thinking they were born in the wrong body, there's something going on there that needs to be treated, because they've already taken such a step that they're already in that position. This isn't just someone who was on the internet one day on Tumblr and kind of got this idea in their head and got confused. This is someone who's so far down this rabbit hole that they're now in the therapist's office. And by the time they get there, they've been online for a long time, digging and digging and digging and getting sucked into this thing. And they're not in a healthy place mentally, for sure.
Well, I mean, I think that's true in lots of cases, but what's so remarkable, especially in various things I've done in this work, including expert witness testimony and things like that, when you review documents of these kids, sometimes they are just fresh off 2 weeks on Tumblr,
Mhm.
and they're just in a place where they're like, I'm trying to
Right.
get oriented here. I'm not sure what's going on. And the absolutely ideological capture of the therapist is actually what accelerates their path down the rabbit hole. So it's really interesting. For sure, in some cases, the kid doesn't show up to the gender clinic until they're way down, but sometimes kids are just teetering with on the edge with a question, and the absolutely horrendous care that they receive pushes them all the way down. So it's a shocking thing to see. I think we all meet parents whose kids are deep into it, but I have seen some cases where a kid was so easily redirectable, just like Rania that I talked about in my story. So it's just shocking when you think about what this belief system does to the therapeutic process.
Okay, I'll concede a bit there.
Oh.
You're right. Now, in that circumstance, I'm questioning the parent why they're taking their kid to the therapist when their kid's only 2 weeks into this thing. Honestly, your kids don't need therapy most of the time. Often, a lot of the time, it's the parents who need the therapy, or the parents who need the coaching, because therapy for me, and this might, you can let me know your opinions on this, but you send a kid to a therapist, what are you doing? You're asking that kid to get in their head, when really they should just be playing outside. But now you want them to ruminate and think about all these things, and it makes it more concrete, in my unprofessional opinion, when really they just need to get off the internet and go play outside and go play with their friends.
I agree with you. I've got 2 kids. One is nearly 17 and the other's 15. I had to pause there. And I would be extremely reluctant to send them to therapy unless they really had something very specific that was seriously distressing, that I really thought I need to bring other adult. And my God, I would need to know that adult very, very well. I suppose I've been impacted over the last few years, but I would be very reluctant.
There's this expression, I didn't invent it, but I use it all the time. Parents are the first educator of their children. You shouldn't be outsourcing the education of your child to the education system. Parents are also the first therapist for their child. No one knows your child like you do. So I think therapy is overused. Now, absolutely, like we saw some of these slides today, absolutely there's a place for it. Finding a good therapist is very, very, very difficult today. There's not many Stella O'Malley's and Sasha Ayats in the world.
And as Lisa, who was over there, as she says, the parents are the world expert on their child.
Right.
Yeah, and it should, in a way, the dismantling of parental authority has been a very insidious and pernicious force in parenting in the last 20, 30 years, culminating in this. But it was happening in all sorts of levels anyway. And I think it's reflective. I'm very conscious we're coming up towards the hour, and I am down to ask you something. And I'm sure you are too. The future, I'm dying to know. Like, have you got a plan worked out, and did you have a plan, and was it when A, B, or C happens, I'll down tools and go back to my life, or is that secret knowledge?
I'm not a big planner at all. I knew before I started this campaign, I knew before the very first billboard I put up that I was engaging in what's probably going to be a lifelong mission to end not only this, to help end not only this, but other issues, because there's a lot wrong going on with our society right now. And when you're a parent and you have kids, it becomes not about you, but the legacy you leave for your kids. And so you look back through humanity's history, it's hard to find something as crazy as trying to change the sex of children. It really is. And we think we're this advanced species because we have all this technology and these beautiful buildings and everything. But psychologically, we're like the people who lived in caves 5,000 years ago. We haven't evolved. We still have lizard brains back there. And so we're prone to all sorts of crazy things. But my long-term plan is just to keep going day by day, keep making friends. I'm going to open a nonprofit in the US soon. I actually just filed a US tax return reporting my incredible income, $2,500 worth of speaker fees last year. It's a lot of money. People think I'm raking in dough or something. But I filed a US tax return so I can get a US tax number, because then I can open a bank account and stuff. And I'm going to open a 501c3, a nonprofit, because we need to do bigger things. We need to do ballot initiatives in the blue states, in the Democrat states. One was tried in California, one was tried in Colorado. And it was just moms and dads doing it. They really didn't have any institutional support. They didn't get the conservative organizations on board. And you need to get the money lined up beforehand so that you can hire the signature gathering firms needed. Because I know if you have the money to get the signatures that are needed, it'll pass on the ballot. And in these blue states, that's the only way to get these passed. Because the people running all the Democrat states are like a cornered animal. And what happens when you get an animal cornered? It freaks out even more. It gets more violent, and it's at its most dangerous. And that's what we're seeing legislatively with these insane laws they're passing, where a child can run away from home from Texas to the state of California, and they'll never return the kid home. They'll ignore court orders, subpoenas, arrest warrants, and custody agreements so that they can transition the child. And they're passing laws like that in California and Minnesota and Maine. And so parents are losing their children in some instances. There's a woman named Abigail Martinez in California whose daughter got indoctrinated into this in California through the Gender and Sexuality Alliance Club at school. Her mom didn't want to give her testosterone because guess what? She knows her daughter. She knows there's something else going on. This daughter was getting teased about her body and stuff. And the state of California put her in state care. And she ended up kneeling down in front of a train. And police had to pick her body up in pieces. The state of California killed that girl. And so we cannot allow this to continue. So a ballot initiative is a great way to stop that. And all it takes in a big state like California would be probably $2 or $3 million. And you get the 800,000 signatures you need. They only need about 550, but the state will throw a bunch out. So I have visions of using my nonprofit to do things like that. And I have met some well-heeled people who haven't helped me. They don't need to help me, but they certainly do need to donate to that nonprofit so we can do some big things.
Will you keep us all posted?
Well, thank you so much, Billboard Chris. You're just as interesting as I thought you would be. And I think from everybody here, I think we really do appreciate your work. It's phenomenal.
Thank you so much. Wow. Thank you. You're done.
You guys killed it.
Do you have the time to listen to me while about nothing and everything all at once? I'm one of those melodramatic fools, talented to the bone, no doubt about it. Sometimes I give myself the grace. Sometimes my mind plays tricks on me. It all keeps adding up. I think I'm cracking up. I'm not just paranoid, no, I'm just stoned. Nobody going back. I went to the street to analyze my dreams. She said it's lack of sense that's bringing me down. I went to the wall. He said my love is a war, and was no winning cause it bringing head down. Yes, sometimes I give myself a twitch. Sometimes my mind plays tricks on me. It all keeps adding up. I think I'm cracking up. Am I just a paranoid or I'm just stoned? Sometimes I give myself the drinks, yeah. Sometimes my mind plays tricks on me. It all keeps adding up. I think I'm cracking up. Am I just paranoid or I'm just stoned? Yes, stoned. I'm just stoned.